So Dr. Rajamendran, a surgery faculty in doctorals and author of Surgery Sixer. Good morning to all. So we're going to discuss INICET 2021 surgery questions, which are 100% authentic answers are being discussed here, and it will take some long time because I'm going to discuss in depth so that it will be suitable for FMG students as well as for the NEET PG exam as well as for NEET SS aspirants who are going to attend this session. So let me start with a patient underwent mastectomy and a drain is kept. What type of drain is this shown in this picture? So you can see this is a very simple question. Anybody worked in a CRI period in the ward, you would have seen so many drains like this. I'm going to discuss certain points related to this drain. So this is a closed suction drain. So you should know what are the types of drains. So this is a question directly taken from Bailey and Love. So there are three types of drain: open drain, closed drain, and semi-closed drain. Semi-closed drain. So open drain, you would have seen after doing a drainage of abscess, we keep a drain like this, which is a corrugated rubber drain, which we keep it like this into an abscess cavity. If this is an abscess cavity, we keep a drain known as corrugated drain. It's an open drain. The problem with the open drain is there is increased risk of infection. There is increased risk of infection, especially from external sources more. From the external sources, by handling and doing dressing, the infection can come from outside to inside like this. So this is the first important thing I want you to remember. Open drains are having increased risk of infection. Therefore, in practice, we are not using open drains in most of the places, especially when we are entering into a cavity like abdominal cavity, thoracic cavity. In all these places, we use pakka closed drains only nowadays. So last year, we had a question on Jackson-Pratt drain. It is a closed drain. This picture, what you are seeing is a Romovac. It's a company name, Romovac suction drain. So it works based on the suction. It is a very interesting suction drain. You can see it will be like a box. When you compress it and when you leave it, it will suck the fluid from the cavity. So it can be kept in places after mastectomy. It can be kept in places after pelvic dissection. In many places, we keep this suction drain. This is the only drain we have in practice. Actually, when you go for practice, you're having only this drain. So there are many drains like Jackson-Pratt drain, which are not commercially available in many places, but mostly we use this suction drain known as Romovac suction drain. So this is a closed drain. You can see that is closed and it is not connected to the atmosphere at all. It will work based on the suction. It will work based on the suction phenomenon. That is a closed drain. So please don't forget these three drains: closed, semi-closed, and closed. Open, semi-closed, and closed. The answer here is D. Okay, it's a closed suction drain. Answer is D. So this is taken directly from page number 100, Bailey and Love. So open drains works on the principle of gravity. There is nothing working. It is just on the principle of gravity. As the patient is sitting or moving, the gravity base, the pus will be draining. Semi-open drain works on the principle of capillary effect. Closed drain uses the function of suction. Closed drain uses the function of suction. And you know very well, we keep drains in many places, and including in chest, we keep an ICD drain, intercostal drainage tube connected to an underwater drain like this. It is also a closed drain. Okay, intercostal drainage, it's a closed drain. Okay, it is working under the principle of when the patient is taking a deep inspiration, the excess fluid inside will come to the underwater drain. So this is an ICD drain. We will remove the ICD drain when the collection coming is less than 10 to 20 ml. Then we will remove this drain. There is no specific day when you will remove the drain. When the content fluid coming daily is less than 10 to 20 ml and lung is expanded, we remove this drain. So all drains you should know when you will remove. Especially this is a repeat question when I'm doing a MRM. In the axilla, we keep a drain to drain the serous. This is a typical suction drain that, as shown in the question. In the axilla, we will remove the serous collection by a suction drain. This drain is removed on. This drain is removed on which day? It is usually removed on 5th post-op day. So please remember, if you keep a drain for removing the serous collection, it is removed on 5th post-op day. It is removed on 5th post-op day. And when I'm doing a colorectal anastomosis, I'm doing a colon with a rectum anastomosis like this. Usually this colorectal anastomosis will leak on 7th post-op day only. Will leak on 7th post-op day only. So colorectal anastomosis usually leak on 7th post-op day. Therefore, the drain I'm keeping in the pelvis will be retained up to 7th day. So this is a very important question. When will you remove each drain? So when I keep it for serous collection, it is on 5th day. When I keep it for anastomotic leakage, it is removed on 7th day. When I keep it for bleeding, especially in a thyroid surgery, when I do a thyroidectomy, I keep a drain in the neck. It is also a small suction drain. This will be removed after 24 hours because bleeding never happens after 24 hours. So for a bleeding from a slipped thyroid artery, we keep a drain in the neck for 24 hours. And these are all direct lines from Bayesian law. I'm not taking anything myself. What is there in Bayesian law? I'm taking you. For bleeding, the drain is removed after 24 hours. For a serous collection, the drain is removed at 5 days. Colorectal surgery, it is removed at 5 to 7 days. And T-tube drain, minimum, it should be there for 10 days. So bleeding from the thyroid, 24 hours. Serous collection, 5 days. Colorectal surgery, 5 to 7 days. And T-tube is removed at 10 days. Okay, chest drain is connected to the underwater, and we can even suck the suction drain at a pressure of 10 to 20 millimeters. We can even do suction in the drain. If we feel it is getting obstructed, we can even suck the drain at 10 to 20 millimeters mercury. So if there are some NEET SS aspirants, I don't know whether they're attending the class, NEET SS aspirants, this question is highly expected. Where is the only place in alimentary tract where drain is found to be useful? Because now the recent concepts is telling there is no use of drain. There are so many controversial issues related to the drain, and recently people started never keeping drain any, especially in Western countries, they're not at all keeping drain in any surgery. So the recent concept is the only place in alimentary tract. I'm telling you, in the GIT, in GIT surgeries after gastrectomy or after colectomy, but nowadays nobody is keeping drain. The only place in alimentary tract where it can be still advocated is for esophageal surgeries. There's a line which is directly from Bayesian law. You can expect this in exam for NEET SS. So please don't forget this point. It's an essential point for your exam. Okay, there's an essential point for your exam. So please don't forget this. So now the question, next question. Midline neck swelling. So these are all typical. You can see now the recent pattern of questions are more and more of clinical oriented. They're not asking any facts which you have to mug up. So midline neck swelling moves with deglutition. Patient has tachycardia exophthalmos. So this can be a case of Graves' disease. So please remember, it can be a case of Graves' disease, or it can be a case of nodular goiter with toxicosis. So these are the two diagnoses you are now coming up. Nodular goiter with toxicosis, because we cannot come to the conclusion from this line alone. A midline swelling moves with deglutition. Patient coming to you with the tachycardia and exophthalmos can be due to nodular goiter going for toxicosis, or it can be a primary toxicosis due to Graves' disease. So this is a typical AIIMS question where what are the investigations to be done? What are the investigations to be done? So you know very well, I'm going to exclude each and every investigation, what we do, what are the uses, etc. So the question thyroid scan, it's nothing but radioactive iodine uptake study. So we give iodine 123 or iodine 131. In diagnostic, we use only 123, not 31. Okay, 123 is having a short half-life of 12 hours. So therefore, we use iodine 123. Iodine 131 has an half-life of 8 days. So we don't use it. We use only iodine 123 for diagnostic. So in diagnostic, the uses are to find out whether the goiter is hyperactive or hypoactive. So there will be more than 48% uptake. And if there are some nodules, that is the main reason we are doing, because this question is not mentioning whether there is any nodule or not. So therefore, if there is a nodule, we can pick up whether it is a warm nodule or a cold nodule. Warm or cold nodule can be picked up with the help of radioactive iodine uptake study and thyroid scan. So therefore, we can accept thyroid scan can be done. This is a toxicosis cases. So I can do a thyroid scan. Number 2, FNAC. Yes, FNAC is less yielding during toxicosis. It's a very basic clinical question. It is a less yielding during the time of toxicosis. During the toxicosis, when I do FNAC, there will be only blood coming in the aspirate. There won't be much tissue. But anyhow, if it is a nodular goiter, please remember, if it is a nodular goiter, I can do this also. FNAC is also indicated if it is a nodular goiter, but the question is not mentioning whether it is a nodular goiter or a Graves' disease. It is not mentioned there, so I cannot come to a conclusion. So better safer side, I'll go for an FNAC will be done. Thyroid function test is a must. Any thyroid disease, you should always do a thyroid function test. So any thyroid problem, you should first do a basic investigation, that is thyroid function test is done. Thyroid antibody is definitely elevated. LATS is a thyroid antibody. What is LATS? What do you mean by LATS? Can you tell me what is LATS? It is a diagnostic of Graves' disease. It is long-acting thyroid stimulator known as LATS will be elevated in Graves' disease. So we have to look for that, especially in a case of toxicosis. LATS should be confirmed, and 1, 2, 3, and 5 is correct. D is correct. So we don't do PET scan. What is the use of PET scan? So this is a neat super specialty level question as well as INI common entrance test questions. PET CT in thyroid. What is the use of PET CT in thyroid cancer? And let us assume it be a cancer also. Will it be useful? PET CT in thyroid cancer is very, very, very less useful because metastasis in thyroid cancer is diagnosed by what is the best method? Yes, PET scan is not the investigation of choice for meds. It is not the investigation of choice for meds. Investigation of choice for meds in thyroid cancer is what? It is thyroid scan. It is a thyroid scan, not PET scan. Please understand this point. So thyroid scan using iodine 123 is the investigation of choice for finding out meds. So then what is the indication of PET CT? Why should I go for a PET CT? That is an interesting point at this point of time. You should not forget what is the indication of PET CT in a thyroid cancer. So what is the tumor marker? Tumor marker of thyroid. The tumor marker of thyroid is thyroglobulin. Okay, thyroglobulin is a tumor marker. So I am doing follow-up of the patient. Thyroglobulin is increased. For a papillary or a follicular cancer, there is a thyroglobulin increased. And I am suspecting there is a metastasis or a recurrence. Immediately I am doing iodine 123 scan. That will show you the meds usually. But if thyroglobulin is elevated and iodine 123 thyroid scan is normal, it is not showing any meds, it is normal, that is the only indication of going for a PET CT scan. This is a high yield MCQ for your exam. So please remember, always don't go with the PET CT. PET CT is used for diagnosing meds, but it is not always used. Especially for thyroid cancer, PET CT is not the investigation of choice. Investigation of choice is thyroid scan. Please don't forget this point. Investigation of choice is thyroid scan, not PET CT. It will be used. That line is there in Bailey and Love, not in any other book. Simple Bailey and Love gives you the simple line. PET CT has a very limited use in thyroid cancers. It is used only in cases where iodine doesn't concentrate in the evaluation of meds. In the evaluation of meds with iodine 131 scan or 123 scan, if it is negative, then only I will go for a PET scan. This is a very interesting point. You should not forget in exam. So this question is also again taken from Bailey and Love. The second question is again from Bailey and Love. Please remember the points from Bailey and Love. Thyroid function must be assessed to exclude hyperthyroidism. If hyperthyroid features are there, thyroid antibodies are done. Ultrasound is the gold standard, must be done for all thyroid cases. FNAC is required only if there is some nodule in ultrasound. But in this question, I could not get a point of nodule. So I'm taking advantage and I'm taking FNAC done with ultrasound guidance nowadays. CT scan is done if there is a breathing difficulty, not always. Please remember, CT scan is not an indication for thyroid. When a patient has features suggestive of retrosternal extension, esophageal and compression, then only we go for a CT scan. Isotope scanning is not routinely necessary. See, again, it is also not routinely necessary. It is principal value is in a evaluation of toxic patient with a nodule. So the question is missing one big point. I would have been happy if the question had a midline neck swelling with the nodules. With the nodules, if it would have been there, that would have been a complete question with a complete correct answer. With nodules missing, now the examiner has the key. The nodules, the answer is 1, 2, 3, 5. If there is no nodule, some investigations are not needed in this condition. Actually, they should have given an ultrasound report. They didn't give the ultrasound report. So it is, I will tell you, this is an incomplete question only to make the students get confused and go wrong in the choice. So therefore, this answer, correct answer, midline swelling with the nodules, answer is 1, 2, 3, 5. If this, since the nodules is missing in the choice, the answer may be something which we may not be knowing, or sometimes the examiner made this question making it as a nodules. Answer will be 1, 2, 3, 5. Except for PET CT, other investigations are useful in a toxic goiter. Okay. Gold standard for a thyroid is FNAC. There is no such gold standard. So for a, if the question is asking gold standard radiological investigation, It is ultrasound. Gold standard pathological investigation is FNAC. No doubt in that. Okay. So if which is best among the two means definitely pathology investigation is always best. It is going to give you a conclusion. So if they are asking ultrasound FNAC, radiologically ultrasound is best, pathologically FNAC is best. And at this point of time, I'll tell you, so FNAC is nowadays replaced by FNNAC, fine needle non-aspiration cytology, and you have to have 6 to 8 follicles on biopsy. 6 to 8 follicles should be present on biopsy, and this is a pathology question we'll be reading in pathology also. And where are the two places where FNAC is not done and core cut biopsy is done in thyroid? Where are the two places where FNAC cannot be done? And therefore, we go for a core cut biopsy. Can you tell me what are the two? 1, 2. Very good, very good. Anaplastic cancer, number 1. One more. For follicular cancer, we don't do FNAC, we don't do core cut biopsy also. FNAC is not useful in follicular. It is not possible in Riedel's thyroiditis. Riedel's thyroiditis and anaplastic cancer, we will go for a core cut biopsy. FNAC may be less yielding. Okay, less yielding. So therefore, we go for an anaplastic, and Riedel's are the two places where we put a core cut thick needle in the thyroid. Okay. So any other doubt you have with related to thyroid and FNAC? So they have, the one thing I liked in this INISET question paper is they made the questions pakka. Each chapter they took one question. That is the most interesting aspect of this paper. I liked very much only one aspect, that is each chapter they took one question. Exactly one question. So thyroid, this is the only question which came. So now from the carcinoma breast, there are two questions which are present in the exam. So this is not a surgery question. This is a pure pathology question. Surgery is done in a carcinoma breast. Frozen section was done. So frozen section is an on-table or immediate biopsy of the specimen and doing a immediate reporting. So that is known as frozen section. This procedure will be useful for all except. So very simple. When all you do, you need a report on the operation theater itself. Within 15 to 20 minutes, the patient is under anesthesia. I have put an incision. Patient is under sedation now. I want to have a conclusion so that I can decide the future treatment or further treatment. So frozen section is needed for margin positivity. If I am doing a breast conservative surgery, if I am doing, and I am feeling that one edge is having suspected malignancy, I will take a small tissue here and send it for frozen section. If it becomes positive, I will do more resection on that part. That is one. Yes, you can use it. For sentinel node, everyone know that answer. Sentinel node is the main reason we are using frozen section. If sentinel node biopsy is positive, we will do extensive axillary dissection. If it is negative, no axillary dissection needed. That is the concept. If sentinel node biopsy is positive, we go for axillary dissection. If it is negative, no further axillary dissection needed. To confirm the diagnosis of malignancy, it's an abrupt mistake here. We don't go for a surgery without knowing it is a malignancy. This confirmation would have been easily done by a true cut biopsy already. True cut biopsy would have given the conclusion already. So this is totally wrong here. To identify the metastatic lesion, for example, if I'm doing a surgery and I'm seeing some nodule, somewhere I'm seeing some nodule, I have a doubt whether it can be a METS. That nodule, I will send it for biopsy. To confirm it is a metastasis, and send it for biopsy. So this is actually not needed in cancer breast, but it is very much useful in other cancers. So anyhow, answer is A, B, D are correct. Wrong answer is to confirm the diagnosis of malignancy is absolutely wrong. Okay, so sentinel node biopsy question is directly from Bailey and Love. And what is the disadvantage of this frozen section? NEET SS question. So NEET SS question, the frozen section, there is a huge disadvantage. That is nothing but subcapsular METs can be missed. Please don't forget, when I'm sending a tumor bit, if there is a subcapsular metastasis, it can be easily missed. That is why I'm telling you it is not used for diagnosis. It is only during the procedure we use to diagnose margin, metastasis, and node. All those things we use. Even in that case also there is a problem. Subcapsular METs can be missed. Please don't forget this point. This is a line from Bailey and Love which is expected in exam. So subcapsular METs can be missed. So sentinel node biopsy is a high yield fact for any exam, especially today in modern surgical practice. We are using it only for breast cancer. You're not using it for cancer penis. You're not using it for malignant melanoma. Nowhere we are using this concept. Though it was used once upon a time in penis, in malignant melanoma, everywhere it was used. And presently, we are not using it anywhere except breast cancer. It can be done by two methods. So there are two methods of doing that. This is a tumor means I can inject isosulfan blue or methylene blue. Isosulfan blue or methylene blue and take the node which becomes blue and send it for frozen section. This is one method. Another method is subareolar. I'm not injecting near the tumor. Okay, in previous case, I'm injecting near the tumor. In radio-labeled colloid method, I'm not injecting it near the tumor. I'm injecting subareolar. Below the areola, I'm injecting. I'm not injecting near the tumor. And I will use a special camera. What is that camera? This is an old image-based question. Special camera was used to pick up the node with the highest radioactivity. What is that camera? Yes, that is gamma camera. So gamma camera is used to pick up the nodes, and very good, that's correct. So gamma camera, don't forget, using a gamma camera, we pick up the metastatic nodes and send it for frozen section. Which is the best method? Isosulfan blue is the best method, or radio-labeled colloid is the best method, or a combined method is best? So naturally, combined method is having high yield. So the best one is to do combined method, is the best method to catch the node positivity. Okay, so please don't forget this question. It's a high yield MCQ from breast. I'm telling you, they had distributed the questions from each and every chapter. They have taken one question. Now from the lower urinary tract, they took an interesting question. 75 years old male. Any doubts in a frozen section or sentinel node biopsy? Please tell me. Okay. 75 years old male patient presented with hematuria. Urine microscopic examination reveals the most common bladder cancer is transitional cell cancer. For FMG exams, the question is having one answer. So urine examination shows there are some cells which we see. Those cells are more positive for transitional cell cancer. Therefore, the surgeon is immediately doing a CT scan. It shows a 2 into 2 centimeter mass in the bladder. Here, there is one important finding missing. That is the finding of, yes, what finding is missing here? I need one more. I'm telling you, most of the questions are incomplete by the INI set. Whether it is incomplete or the student's recall is incomplete, I don't know. But the point here is there is no point mentioned about the invasion, whether it is invasion into the muscles or not. Because if it is infiltrating the muscle, the entire management is different. If it is not infiltrating the muscle, it is only involving lamina propria, the different management is different. So I will divide the tumor into non-muscle invasive tumor and muscle invasive tumor. I will divide it into two. One is muscle invasive tumor and non-muscle invasive tumor. So lamina propria is a non-muscle invasive. Very easy to manage. Non-muscle invasive is very easy to manage. I will just like that do a transurethral resection of bladder tumor. That's enough. If it is a non-muscle invasive like TA or T1, I will do a simple treatment of only removing the tumor with a good margin using a cystoscope. But if it is invading the muscles means T2 and above, I have to go for a radical cystectomy with ileal conduit. So what will be the answer for this? No one knows. No one knows. The answer is, the explanation is very clear. Answer, no one knows. 2 into 2 centimeter mass is not a criteria. 2 into 2 centimeter mass is not a criteria for the exam. The size is not a criteria in bladder cancer. The depth is the important prognostic factor. Depth of invasion is what we need to confirm the management. So depth of invasion is up to the lamina propria, or a superficial bladder cancer will need a simple transurethral resection of bladder cancer plus BCG therapy intravesically. That is a very simple therapy. If it is a T2, I will go for a radical cystectomy and ileal conduit. If it is a T3, I would have gone for a neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by a radical cystectomy. So nothing can be derived from this data which the surgeon has given, which the examiner has given. But I will tell you one thing. There is a line from Bailey and Love. That line says 70% of the cancers present, 70% of the bladder cancers presenting to hospital are all TA or T1. Therefore, transurethral resection I will vote for. Which one I will vote for is, I will vote for superficial tumor infiltrating lamina propria. Therefore, I will go for a transurethral resection of tumor is the one which tumor I will vote for in this answer. So I am going for Transurethral resection of bladder tumor is done for superficial TA and T1 cancers. 70% cases are in this stage, so I will vote for this. Okay, so there is still I'll tell you this question is again an incomplete question. So very clearly explained this chapter on bladder cancer is excellently explained only in Bailey and Lau. Radical cystectomy with the pelvic lymphadenectomy is the gold standard for T2, T3 cases without evidence of METs. CT abdomen is the investigation of choice to evaluate the nodes and make a decision. Bone scan with the technetium-99 and bone marrow MRI will help to find out the spread to bones. CT chest is a must to rule out pulmonary METs, is more sensitive than plain X-ray. And after cystectomy, the commonly used conduit is ileal conduit, and the surgical mortality is 2%. And I was wondering, many students actually told there is some other choice, no treatment needed like that. So I'll tell you, this is not the correct answer. Even if there is no treatment mentioned in the choice, it is not the correct answer because bladder cancer always needs surgery. And most of the students got confused with their prostate cancer. Okay, prostate cancer, we can wait and watch. If the patient is very old, above 75 or 80 years, we can wait and watch because for a early cancer, they won't die of prostate cancer. They will die of some other cause even before the prostate cancer takes its upper hand. Therefore, I'll tell you, age is not a contraindication for radical cystectomy because it actually happens after 75 years only. So don't get confused with the radical prostatectomy of wait and watch policy is only for prostate cancer, not for bladder cancer. This confusion, some students told that there is a wait and watch, so they have opted for wait and watch. It is absolutely wrong. Okay. So any doubts you have in a bladder cancer? I hope you are understanding. If I'm going fast, please tell me, I'll go slow. So all the questions are actually simple questions, easy, straightforward questions, but the point is the explanation for the questions are not so accurate and so clear. That's the reason, that's the problem here. Nasogastric tube, so Ryle's tube. I'm going to put a Ryle's tube. It cannot be same size for all, no? Some people will be short, some people will be tall. So usually the commonly available tubes are 110 to 130 centimeter, but I cannot use this tube for all the people. So I need a exact length to be inserted. So what are the ideal length of Ryle's tube? It is derived from a rule known as Nex rule and Nemu rule. So these are all from internet sources and these are all repeat questions, and this is already explained in Surgery 6er. I have already made this in page number 13. This explanation is perfect because this already 3 times asked AIMS question, not first time. So next rule is nose to ear, earlobe, and from earlobe to xiphisternum. This is enough for adults. In a children, nose to ear to midpoint between xiphisternum and umbilicus. So that is known as Nemu rule for children and Nex rule for adults. So in this question, luckily we had only Nex. They didn't ask about Nemu. So I went for Nex. Though they don't mention whether it is a pediatric or adult. So tip to nose to earlobe to midline between xiphisternum and umbilicus is as per Nemu rule. This is correct. So answer is A. So it's a simple, straightforward question. Otherwise, all the other question choices are absolutely wrong. So we directly went for A. So Nex is used for adult. Nemu is used for children. That's the rule. Simple 2 rules for Ryle's tube. So there is a simple question again. How to know the tip is there in the stomach? What is the best method? I wanted to ask one more question in the Ryle's tube itself. Best method to confirm the tip in the stomach? No, not X-ray. There is one more best method. Aspirate and do pH. Not only aspiration and pH testing with the help of litmus paper. It is a very simple test. I hope you would have seen litmus papers during your chemistry lab in your school days. You just not push also. Many of us are still doing in your house agency, pushing with air. So please remember, whatever you do in house agency period in your hospital is not the ideal method. There are certain protocols which are crossed by our chief and assistants for simplicity and easy going doing the what. But actually it should be aspirated, and the aspirate content should be checked on a litmus paper. It will show you acidic pH. That is the ideal method. It is ideal method. We can do any method. X-ray you can take. You can push air. Anything you can take. But the best is to look for aspirate and do the pH testing. That is ideal method to know the tip is in the stomach. Okay. So when a Ryle's tube is inserted, it is coiling into the mouth. What is your diagnosis? coiling in mouth. When I'm putting the Ryle's tube through the nose, it is coming out through the mouth. What is the diagnosis? Ryle's tube is in the chest. What is your diagnosis? What is your diagnosis? Yes, very good. Tracheoesophageal fistula is the answer for first question. Ryle's tube in the chest. It is diaphragmatic hernia. It can be a congenital diaphragmatic hernia or an acquired diaphragmatic hernia. It is due to diaphragmatic hernia. Actually, it is esophageal atresia. The correct answer is esophageal atresia. The tube will coil and come out of the mouth. Okay, so that's correct. Very good, Bhargav Patel. That's perfect. So now again, the question from Galbert. I'm telling you, every topic had one question. That's an interesting point in this question setter's specialty. He never did any partiality for any chapter. He asked questions from all the chapters. So any doubt you have related to Ryle's tube, you please tell me. So some of them asked me how long this session will go, but I don't know how long it will go. So when you feel I want to go fast, you tell me I'll go fast. Otherwise, I'll go with the same speed, because I wanted this session to be useful for multiple cadre of people like FMG students, NEET PG aspirants, NEET SS aspirants. All of them can get utilized from this session. A patient presented with jaundice to the hospital. Jaundice to the hospital. Ultrasound and CT was done, shows no stone in the gallbladder. See, interesting. Patient has intrahepatic biliary radicals dilated. There is no stone in the gallbladder, no stone in the bile duct on ultrasound. So ultrasound and CT are not giving you a good diagnosis. What is the next investigation? Can you tell me here what is the correct answer here? Yes, please remember, many students wrote something else thinking there is no MRCP. Please remember, MRCP and MRI are same. No confusion in that. I don't know why you got confusion. MRI, T2 weighted image. T2 weighted image of MRI in gallbladder and pancreatic system is known as MRCP, because in MRCP we are not using any contrast. The bile acts as a contrast. So since bile is acting as a contrast and pancreatic juice acts as a contrast, we call it as magnetic resonance cholangiopancreatography. There is no contrast used, no gadolinium, nothing is used. The contrast in the gallbladder and pancreas and bile duct is nothing but the secretions that acts as a contrast. So the correct answer here is MRCP. No confusion that ERCP, PTC, PET-CT are all absolutely wrong. There is no controversy in this question. They are all absolutely wrong. ERCP is an invasive investigation. We don't do this in the era of MRCP. In the era of MRCP, ERCP is outdated. ERCP is only used for a therapeutic purpose. When there is a problem seen in MRCP, then only I will go for ERCP. The question is not asking which is the gold standard. The question is asking what is next. So the next is MRCP. Okay. So I'll show you this question is highly expected for your exams. This is a picture of MRCP. So especially FMG aspirants, please understand what are these investigations. This is an MRCP with the bile in the gallbladder, bile duct and pancreatic juice. You can see the entire anatomy. Gallbladder, bile duct, pancreatic duct. All the anatomy I've seen here. This is an excellent picture of MRCP. Normal picture you can see here. And this is sphincter of OD. If there is a stone obstructed here, there will be dilatation of all the ducts. Okay. So this is a picture showing you an ERCP. Endoscopically, you can take a picture of pancreatic duct and bile duct. And this is the picture showing you endoscopy. So how to differentiate MRCP and ERCP? In ERCP, you will definitely have a picture of endoscopy also. It is a side viewing endoscopy. What is a common complication in this procedure? The most common complication of this procedure is highly controversial, but the correct answer is acute pancreatitis. In 3 to 5% patients, they develop acute pancreatitis, which can be reduced nowadays by giving analgesics. So yes, very good. It is not bleeding. Many people are answering as bleeding, but bleeding is not that much common complication. Bleeding means any surgery you do, there will be bleeding. It will stop automatically. If it is going to bleed continuously and we are going to open, that is bleeding. So this complication here is pancreatitis. And yes, sphincterotomy, if you do, it is done at 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock position. That is correct, Yash? That's correct. 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock are the two positions which are avascular area. So we will do sphincterotomy at one of these two positions in the sphincter of OD. Okay, this is very important investigation. And this is the last investigation. You should not get confused in the exam. This is a picture of a tube you can see is put into the liver directly. A tube is put inside the liver. Percutaneous transhepatic cholangiography. So in this, we directly put the contrast into the liver. This is percutaneous transhepatic cholangiography. Yes, this can be used to drain the bile. That procedure is known as percutaneous transhepatic biliary drainage, PTBD. No, sepsis actually was mentioned in Bailey and Lau because it is when it is done for patients with cholangitis. So please remember, when ERCP done for cholangitis patient, that time you get sepsis as a most common complication because already patient is in sepsis, near sepsis. So when ERCP is done for cholangitis, the patient can develop sepsis. I am telling you a diagnostic ERCP. When I am doing a simple diagnostic ERCP or a simple stenting with the ERCP, that time I'm telling you the answer. So, but for patients who are having cholangitis, if I'm going for ERCP, definitely the patient already will be in sepsis, and sepsis will be one of the most common presentation in such cases. Okay. So percutaneous transhepatic cholangiography is the investigation of choice to study the proximal biliary duct. This is a line from Bailey and Lau. This expected MCQ for NEET PG. Investigation of choice to study the proximal biliary duct, like right hepatic duct, left hepatic duct, or secondary ducts. Answer is PTBD, PTC. Okay, no confusion in that. Please remember this answer. So there is a question from system. So you can see each system had one question. The next question is again from trauma, the repeated question, but this time they went one step ahead and they started asking the amount of fluid that can be infused with a 18 gauge green Venflan. So 18 gauge green Venflan, how much ml of fluid can be flown is taken only from internet, not from any other textbooks, and it is last year surgery 6 page number 10. This is a picture from surgery 6 page number 10. So this is 18 gauge. The fluid rate is 90. So I used to remember as 180, 90, 60 because I am sure one of these three will be asked. So I was remembering in multiples of 30, it should be remembered like orange is 240, 180, 90, 60, and 30. This is the order I used to remember. So orange, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22. You can go, it is multiples of like that you remember. Okay, 240, 180, 90, 60, 30. So remember like that. So in this, and usually they will ask you only this green Venflan. It is usually 90 ml per minute. Amount we can infuse is 90 ml per minute. So in a trauma patient, when a patient comes to us in a trauma, what is ideal cannula should be used? Can you tell me? What is ideal cannula should be used? I'm asking a simple question, no confusion in this. You should not get confused in this also. So this is especially NEET SS aspirants, you should not at all get confused in this. What is the ideal cannula? So the ideal cannula is 2 green Venflan. Very good. The ideal cannula is 2 green Venflan. 2 green Venflan is ideal. Minimum, this is minimum. But what can be used? What is the cannula which can be used for maximum fluid? Maximum can be 14 gauge orange. If it is not there in the choice, go for 16 gauge gray. So if they ask you what is ideally used in trauma, means we use 2 green minimum. But if there is a question is asking what is the cannula which can infuse maximum fluids, when you go for orange or gray. First option orange, second option gray. Okay. And what is the advice? What is the advice in a trauma center? How much ml of fluid should be infused? What fluid should be infused? In a trauma patient with a hemorrhagic shock, what is the fluid should be infused immediately and how much ml should be infused immediately? Yes, it's very good. The fluid to be infused is crystalloids. Crystalloids should be infused and it should be 1 liter, not 2 liter. From last year, 2 liters, they changed it now to 1 liter. So from last year, it was 2 liters. Now it changed it to 1 liter. And the ideal crystalloid is not ringer lactate. It is normal saline from ATLS manual. And it is 7.5% hypertonic saline from Sabiston. Sabiston says 7.5% hypertonic saline and ATLS says normal saline. ATLS says normal saline, not ringer lactate. Okay. So 1 liter of normal saline should be given immediately as soon as you receive a patient. 1 liter of normal saline can be given immediately with the 2 green Venflan. It will take around 200 ml, like that. You just think we are putting 2 cannula. So it will take in 2 minutes to 3 minutes. We can infuse 1 liter of fluid in a hemorrhagic shock patient. In a ATLS manual, it says like that. So ATLS manual says 90 ml can flow in one cannula. So 90 means one cannula 5 minutes, it will take 500 ml, another cannula 5 minutes, 500 ml. So within 10 minutes, we can resuscitate the patient with 1 liter of normal saline. So this is another point, important point, please remember. But if they ask you what is the cannula used for maximum infusion, go for orange or gray, which is ideally used, which is minimum to be used. Not even asking ideal, which is minimum to be used is minimum 2 green. No role of pink, blue, yellow. You can see from the discussion itself, there will be nothing related to trauma. They are not at all used for trauma cases. So please understand everything about IV cannulas. It's a high yield question for any exam. FMG, NEET PG, INI said any exam, this will be a high yield question for your exams. Okay. So again, I'm telling you another question from appendix. A direct line from Bailey and Love, but again a controversial point here. A patient who had McBurney's incision is converted to Rutherford-Morrison incision. Interesting point you should know. First of all, you should know what is McBurney, what is Rutherford-Morrison before going to the further discussions. Okay. In McBurney's incision, will I cut any muscle? That is my first question. Will you tell me? Will I cut any muscle in McBurney's incision? Will I cut any muscle? In McBurney's incision, I will not cut any muscle. That's the interesting first point I want you to remember. In McBurney's incision, medial 2/3, lateral 1/3 at McBurney's point, I will make a line incision like this. In the skin, it is an incision made on the skin. Then it will be extended to the external oblique aponeurosis, not muscle. There will be no muscle at that point. There will be external oblique aponeurosis. After the aponeurosis open, I will do splitting of the muscle. Very good. Splitting of internal oblique and transverse abdominis muscle will be done by me now. With the help of 2 long artery forceps, I will be splitting the muscles. I will not cut the muscle at all. This is the regularly done McBurney's incision. That is the reason in appendicectomy scar, we don't get hernias. Because that is only a muscle splitting incision and the muscles get approximated and there won't be a weakness for a hernia. But if there is a difficulty in delivering the appendix is found retrocecally like this. So cecum is there, this appendix is very higher up and retrocecal. I have to cut the muscles. Which muscle now will I cut? Which muscle will I cut? I have to cut the muscles laterally like this, not medially. I will not go anywhere medially. I won't go anywhere medially at all. I will only cut it laterally so that I will go and dissect the cecum, ascending colon, and I will deliver the appendix. So that time I will cut the muscles. What are the muscles I will cut now? I will cut internal oblique and transverse abdominis. And please remember, external oblique may also be cut because muscle starts there. So the answer is 1, 2, 3. If you want to understand this, you should understand this anatomy. So this is a picture showing you McBurney's line. So this is a McBurney's point. So I will start cutting it. I will start cutting it means I will start cut the muscles like this. So all the 3 muscles will be cut. This is the actual answer, but Bailey is making a small controversy at this point of time. I'll read the line from Bailey and Lau. The gridiron incision is also known as MacArthur incision, also known as McBurney's incision. All are same. Gridiron or MacArthur or McBurney's, all are same. After opening the external oblique aponeurosis, appendix is reached by a muscle splitting method. If there is a difficulty to access the appendix, Rutherford-Morrison incision is made, which is a muscle cutting of internal oblique and transverse abdominis. I think the examiner has taken the line, this line only. At the same time, he forgot to read another line in Bailey and Lau. That is the last line in the same paragraph. Rutherford-Morrison incision is a very helpful for paracecal and retrocecal position. It is a oblique muscle cutting incision with its lower end over the McBurney's point. It will not extend below the McBurney's point and only extends upwards and laterally as necessary, in which all layers of muscles are divided. This is another line from the same chapter, same paragraph. Actually, this is the correct line. Internal oblique and transverse abdominis alone is cut is mentioned in another place. If the question setter has not read this paragraph fully, he would have kept this as a choice. But I'm telling you the answer is, correct answer is all the muscles will be cut. Internal oblique, transverse abdominis and external oblique muscle also will be cut in a Rutherford-Morrison incision. And there is high chances of hernia with this type of incision. Okay, Rutherford-Morrison will have high chances of hernia, and no rectus abdominis incision is muscle is cut. So please remember, this is a rectus abdominis here. We don't go that place at all. So rectus abdominis is not cut. That is the point here. It will not be touched at all by this incision. So Lane's incision. So now I want you to know what is a landmark of Lane's incision. So landmark of Lane's incision is very simple. Just below the umbilicus, at the line mid-clavicular line to mid-inguinal point, you draw a line, okay? So you draw a line, transverse line is made, incision made 2 centimeters below the umbilicus, centered between mid-clavicular and mid-inguinal line. So this is the point. So this umbilicus 2 centimeters below, make a transverse line like this. This is a line known as Lane's incision, which is a skin crease incision, where the sari which the lady is going to wear is going to go along this line and it will not be seen at all outside. So this is mostly a cosmetic purpose. We are making this incision. Otherwise, there is nothing special about this incision. The major point I want to tell you here is there is an interesting line in Bailey and Love. This incision is very helpful for better exposure, for easy extension, and better in obese patients. This line I never expected until I read the line from Bailey and Love. Obese patients, which is better incision, can be a future MCQ for NEET SS exams. If you want a better exposure, which will be better, means it is a transverse incision, so you can easily extend on both direction and you can expose the entire abdominal contents by this incision. This line I want you to remember, especially if you are a NEET SS aspirant, you must remember this line. For easy extension, better exposure, and obese patient, which is best, means answer is Lane's. It is a line from Bailey and Love. Okay, never miss this line. So in a Lane's incision extension, we can divide the rectus abdominis also, so that we'll get a good exposure. If there is a problem towards the medial side in the Meckel's diverticulum is present, something else, we can use the Lane's incision to extend and deliver the Meckel's also. So that's an advantage of this. So there's a next question, simple question again from trauma. A patient had chest trauma, normal respiratory rate and normal respiratory effort. That is an image-based question. Which of the following must not be done? So from the picture you are seeing, there is a pleural effusion. Okay, you can see pleural effusion. There is some amount of pleural effusion. There is pleural effusion. And you can see a air content. Many of you might be thinking it is a pneumothorax or hydropneumothorax. But please remember, it is a gastric shadow which has come up. It is a traumatic diaphragmatic hernia. It is a picture showing you a traumatic diaphragmatic hernia. So many of you will be thinking, since there is a pleural effusion, I should put an ICD. Even if the respiratory effort is good, let me drain the pleural effusion, or it may be a hemothorax also. Let me put an ICD. I have seen 2 cases of ICD being put in a traumatic diaphragmatic hernia. That ICD tube is going through the stomach and into the stomach, and the patient presented to my clinic with the ICD showing food contents coming out. The moment I saw a food content, I could say it was an diaphragmatic hernia. The surgeon has put a tube thinking it is a pneumothorax or a hydropneumothorax or a pleural effusion. So it is absolutely contraindicated, ICD tube. So log roll is not a contraindication. If you want, you can do. Log roll is contraindicated in which injury? So yeah, NEET SS question. Log roll must not be done when there is a dash. Log roll is absolutely contrary. Very good, Bhargav Patel. Very good. Yash, it is a pelvic fracture. Very good. So you're all very much ready for the exams. So pelvic fracture, log roll is absolutely contraindicated. In all other places, if you want, you can do log roll, but there is no role of log roll in nowadays because we have CT scan whole body available. So log roll, if you want, you can do, but not advised for pelvic fracture. Nasogastric tube, nothing wrong. Actually, if I have put a nasogastric tube, I would have seen the tube in the stomach here. So I would have made an easy diagnosis. Endotracheal intubation is must. You can do endotracheal intubation. You should not do bag mask ventilation. Bag mask ventilation is contraindicated because it will push more gas into the stomach and it will cause more respiratory distress. So diaphragmatic hernias, whether it is a congenital or traumatic or acquired, bag mask ventilation is contraindicated. We must intubate. So what should not be done is very simple, ICD tube. Okay. So diaphragmatic hernia. Let me discuss a few points about the diaphragmatic hernia. It is a favorite topic for NEET SS as well as for NEET PG. So diaphragmatic hernia can happen in penetrating trauma as well as in blunt trauma. Who will have a major rent? Can you tell me? Penetrating trauma will have a huge opening or a blunt trauma will have a huge opening? I was also thinking penetrating trauma will have a huge rent, but when you are reading Bailey and Love, Blunt trauma, the compressive forces causes huge tear in the diaphragm. Huge tear in the diaphragm will be seen in a blunt trauma. And more interesting is, these patients will present very late. Many times they are not diagnosed during injury. They go home. They'll come after a few months with a huge diaphragmatic hernia on the left side. So this is very important. So diaphragmatic hernia can present delayed also. And when they come to you, it is diagnosed by simple method. X-ray just can diagnose it. But what is the gold standard to diagnose this? What is a gold standard to diagnose diaphragmatic hernia? Not CT. Gold standard is diagnostic lab or VATS. One of this is the gold standard. So CT, X-ray, everything can diagnose. But what is a gold standard? There is a line from Bailey and Love. You should not forget. Most accurate investigation is VATS or diagnostic laparoscopy. And all cases are repaired by abdominal approach. Nothing we will do by thoracic approach. Most of the cases remain silent and present late. Very important. All points are very, very interesting. So blunt injury, the diaphragmatic rupture is usually large. Diagnosis is usually missed in acute phase and diagnosed during operation also. All these things can happen. What is Bergquist triad? It is for NEET SS. What is Bergquist triad? Fracture of ribs, fracture of spine or pelvis with a rupture of diaphragm. This is known as Bergquist triad. So Bergquist triad is fracture of ribs, fracture of spine, and diaphragm rupture. So this is known as Bergquist triad. So Bergquist triad is fracture of ribs, fracture of spine, and diaphragm is known as Bergquist triad. So this is a NEET SS question, maybe asked for INI set also. Please don't forget Bergquist triad. Okay, any doubt you have in diaphragmatic hernia? Diaphragmatic hernias always need surgery. We approach through abdomen and we repair the diaphragm by using a Prolene suture. Using a Prolene suture, or with the mesh, if you are going to use, you should use a dual mesh. One side Prolene, another side Vicryl mesh. Dual mesh should be used if you are going to use a huge mesh for diaphragmatic hernias. Most of the time, we can repair it by suture itself. Especially traumatic hernias, we can repair by with the Prolene itself. So from general aspects of surgery, there is a simple question. What is the most common complication? I don't know why the examiner, what does the examiner want in this question? Yes, correct. What does the examiner want from this question? He was asking a most common complication or inserting a central on, actually the question was something different. They didn't mention central vein. On putting an incision, common complication on incision below this bone. This is the question. On the incision below this bone, we will make one incision here only for subclavian vein. So therefore, the students have modified the question as subclavian central vein insertion. What complication can happen? What do you think will be the correct answer for this? It's a very simple question. Again, it's telling it's a clinical based question. Anybody, what is the answer? So I was also actually thinking before reading the journals as chylothorax. I thought since left side chest was given, so there may be a chylothorax may be more common. But when I went and read this journal by Craig Combo, International Journal of Critical Care, internet sources, it shows very clearly arterial puncture is the most common complication of central veins. On central vein insertion, 5 to 9% chances of arterial puncture can happen is the most common complication. Not pneumothorax, please remember, not thrombophlebitis. Central vein thrombosis is very rare compared to peripheral veins. So it's very clearly mentioned about the complications like this. Failure to place the catheter, 22%, arterial puncture, 5%, malposition, 4, pneumothorax, 1, subcutaneous hematoma, hemothorax, cardiac arrest, 1. So these are the answers. So very interestingly, they have discussed about vascular complications. I don't know whether this question may be repeated, but I wanted to tell you about the vascular complication of central vein insertion. So let us assume this is a subclavian vein and this is a subclavian artery. Okay, let us assume this is subclavian vein and subclavian artery being inserted. So now I'm trying to cannulate this subclavian. I'm trying to cannulate this subclavian vein with the central vein. Nowadays, ultrasound has come. So ultrasound guidance, it's very perfectly cannulated. So I can insert the central vein through the vein, subclavian vein correctly, but still there are chances of arterial injury. If I puncture, arterial puncture is done, what will you do now? This point I want you to remember not only for exam, but also for your practice. If you are puncturing the artery, what we are doing in your hospital, that is what I'm telling you. Whatever you do in your hospital is not always correct. If you puncture the artery, what we do is pressure. We give pressure, remove the cannula immediately, and we will do pressure of that artery. Number one, this is one method. Number two, what we do is, what some people they do is, they will leave the cannula there itself for some period of time and they won't remove it. They leave the cannula there itself, leave it there itself and remove it afterwards. Remove it after a few days. So pressure compression, leave it. These both are wrong methods of dealing with the arterial puncture. There is an excellent line from this journal. If inadvertent injury happens, two options are there. Immediate removal of catheter with pressure can result in immediate removal of catheter with the pressure removal can result in AV fistula and uncontrolled hemorrhage. So not advised. Prolonged arterial catheterization, leave it there itself, let us not remove, can result in thrombosis, neurological deficits and stroke. Then what should I do, sir? What is the latest? Recent studies says leaving the catheter in place and shift the patient to operation theater, prompt repair there itself in the operation theater gives less morbidity and mortality than giving pressure. I have not seen a single case in our hospital shifted to theater because of an arterial injury, but this is a line from the journal. So this question can therefore be expected for your exam. So what is ideal? Leave the catheter there itself, shift the patient to OT and repair the arterial injury in the theater, because if I give pressure, I can cause AV fistula. If I prolong, I can cause thrombosis. So this is not done in practice. I'm telling you that whatever we are doing in practice, we cannot say it for exams. There are some studies, there are some journals which say what is ideal. So they are saying recent studies say leaving the catheter and repairing in the theater is good. So, but this cannot be asked as MCQ. Just I'm telling you arterial puncture during central vein catheter, how to manage that point. I'm telling you here from this journal, because this question is taken from this journal only. Arterial injury is most common with femoral catheter placement and less common in subclavian placement. That's an interesting point, and you know that very well. Because in femoral artery, we always do compression and we all lead to one complication. What is it? Pseudoaneurysm of femoral artery. We have seen enormous cases because of the femoral artery cannulation. House surgeons, when they go and take blood from the femoral vein, they accidentally injure the femoral artery and cause pseudoaneurysm of femoral artery. Very common. So, but this is the concept. You just know the concept. What is done in practice is totally different. We only give pressure. That's all. The pressure for 5 minutes. Most of the time, we will settle with that. Okay. And chylothorax is explained only in this journal. Left-sided internal jugular vein or subclavian vein carries high risk of lymphatic injury, but lymphatics injury can happen on right side also. But please remember, lymphatic injuries can happen on the right side also. So this is a very interesting line. So please remember this journal. It is purely based on this journal. It is not there in any of our surgical books. Maybe it is there in anesthesia books, but surgery books doesn't explain anything about it. Okay. So any doubt you have related to central vein? Central vein catheter related sepsis. It's a question from Valian law. Catheter related sepsis. What will you do? That's an interesting question. Patient coming to you with the fever and there is a redness at the point of central catheter. What should you do now from Valian law? 1, 2. Valian law 27th edition. What does it say? Valian law 27th edition. What does it say? Previous edition was very simple. When you suspect, yes, the answer you are making the previous edition answer. Remove and send the tip to culture. It's old edition. Okay. Guys, what you are telling to confirm it is sepsis, remove the catheter and send for tip for culture sensitivity is an old answer. It is not the answer now. 27th edition Bailey is very clear. You can do by 2 methods. Number 1, some of you are answering it correctly. As Karishma Singh is correct. Swab from the central vein. Please do a endoluminal brush. Yes, that's correct. Through the central vein catheter, you put a endoluminal brush and take from the central venous catheter, take and send for culture sensitivity. Simultaneously, what should I do? Simultaneously, I should do peripheral blood. Culture sensitivity should be done. If both are same, it is catheter related sepsis, remove the catheter. Please remember, if both are same, remove the catheter. Otherwise, don't remove the catheter. Catheter is costly and we cannot keep on puncturing the patient again and again. That is the concept. So remove the catheter. If both are same organism, remove the catheter. Or else aspirate blood. This is from Valian law only. Aspirate blood from central vein, peripheral vein. Both are same, remove the catheter. Old concept. as some of you are still answering because it is there in surgery 6 also, old edition, surgery 6 also was mentioning that only. Old concept says, the point is very clear. The old concept says, when you suspect sepsis, remove the catheter, send the tip for culture sensitivities, no more the answer. We are not doing that. Okay, we are not doing that. So 1 and 2 are good options without compromising the central vein catheter. So this will be the 2 correct answers as per 27th edition Bailey. You can go and verify. This is the answer from 27th edition. Okay. 20-year-old male met with a road traffic accident and suffered with upper limb injury with a laceration over the arm. This is a definite NEET SS question. I don't know why they asked for NEET PG. This is a definite NEET SS question. It is already a NEET SS question. Already asked NEET SS question from vascular surgery, high yield MCQ from NEET SS. I don't know why they asked for NEET PG. Now slowly they are mixing up the questions. Radial and ulnar pulse is not felt. This is a brachial artery. I am not so having a clear-cut picture, but there is a longitudinal laceration like this for 2.5 centimeter longitudinal laceration. What is ideal repair now? So most of you will be answering C. That is wrong. The line from Sebastian very clearly says segmental resection of the vessel with the replacement of a reverse saphenous vein graft. If you want to know more detail and if it is correct, it is there in Sebastian. One full page. If you are a NEET SS aspirant, this page 1805 going to be an MCQ for you. You must read this page. Let me explain about this. Upper limb vascular injuries. Its heading is upper limb vascular injuries. In a trauma, upper limb vascular injuries, please remember certain points. Upper limb vascular injuries, if there is a discontinuity of the vessel, for example, if there is a brachial artery or whatever artery, if there is a discontinuity of vessel, when we can bring them together without tension, with no tension, when you can approximate, end to end is good method. End to end is advised. If you can bring it without tension, you can do end to end. But this is 2.5 centimeter. You cannot bring it without tension. It is not at all possible. Therefore, this much big gap, what is ideal? There are multiple options available, like a saphenous vein from the leg, number 1, or we can use a prosthetic PTFE, polytetrafluoroethylene graft, to fill this gap. Which is best among these two? Can you tell me, PTFE or saphenous vein? Here only the Sebastian says very clearly, PTFE is a second choice, not the first choice. That is why in this discussion on upper limb vascular injuries, there is a line saying, when you are going to operate for an upper limb vascular injury, paint the limb one joint above the injury place. For example, there is a cubital injury, paint up to the shoulder, and please paint one lower limb also for taking saphenous vein. So the ideal graft is saphenous vein graft. So ideally, we should replace with saphenous graft. Which one will I repair? If there is a brachial artery as well as the vein is also injured, there is a vein also is damaged, which one will I repair first? Artery or vein? So please remember this question answer is saphenous vein interposition graft. There is the same paragraph having some more interesting lines. If there is artery as well as vein is injured, which one will I repair first? Repairing is done first for. Yes, artery will be repaired first. No doubt. It is a universal phenomenon. It is always artery which is repaired first. But if there is a venous compromise seen, that's a line from Sebastian. If there is a venous compromise seen, you want to save the venous flow, you can do vein to vein anastomosis first. Meanwhile, what I will do is I will put a temporary stent inside the artery like this. You can put a temporary stent in the artery and we can do vein to vein reconstruction first, followed by artery also. In fact, if the vein is having a good collateral, we can even ligate the vein. Ligate the vein also can be done if there is a good collateral, but if the ligating, there is a compromise of vein seen, you can do vein to vein. Meanwhile, by putting a temporary stent in the artery. This is an excellent paragraph from Sebastian. Please read for NEET SS as well as for INISET. If vein injury is associated and cannot be ligated due to compromised collateral venous flow, vein repair is done first. If distal arterial flow and ischemia is a concern, temporary intraluminal shunt is done. If distal arterial flow and ischemia is a concern, temporary intraluminal shunt is done. Primary repair of artery is done end to end only if there is no tension. Saphenous vein is chosen whenever there is a tension. Okay, this is a point I want you to remember. High yield MCQ for NEET SS exams also. Please remember, any doubt with related to brachial artery injury, the same concept is for radial artery injury, ulnar artery injury, everything. Okay, so please remember this point. So now there is a question from vascular surgery. Now there is a question from liver, new question from liver. So totally new. So far not asked in the exam. Increasing incidence globally. HCC tumor less than 3 centimeter. There is a tumor of hepatocellular cancer less than 3 centimeter. Yes, it is increasing globally because of B virus and C virus and cirrhosis. Transarterial chemoembolization is done for multinodular tumor. That is the catch point. Very, very interesting point. It is true. I'll explain about it. Lenvatinib and ipilimumab. Some one of these two drugs are given in the exam. I don't know which drug was given. There is a confusion among the students. Is used in the treatment of tumor less than 3 centimeter. Whatever the drug given, totally wrong. Sorafenib, livatinib, any monoclonal antibody is done only for metastatic HCC. Not at all for small tumor like this. We don't give any of these drugs. NASH and NAFLD or the risk factors is a very interesting thing that is going to be the future. There is a study going on, and the study is saying 20 years back, alcohol was a common cause of cirrhosis and liver transplant, 20-30 years back. And 10 years back, the common cause of cirrhosis and liver transplant was hepatitis B virus. And recently, it was hepatitis C virus. Recently, present days, it is hepatitis C virus is a common cause of cirrhosis and transplant. In 2030 and 2040, the common cause of cirrhosis will be alcohol, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Already, most of you will be having a fatty liver. That is going to be the future. Fatty liver causing cirrhosis, causing HCC, and maybe the most common indication of transplant in future. It will be the most common indication of transplant after one or two decades. The answer here is 1, 2, 4 is correct. Okay, 1, 2, 4 is correct. 3 is wrong. Lenvatinib, ipilimumab, all these are monoclonal antibodies which are used only for, it is not from Sabiston. The drugs are not there in Sabiston. It is from NCCN guidelines. NCCN guidelines. So therefore, you can, don't worry about the question. Only about taste, it is explained excellently in, so let us assume. So the question is asking, TACE is done for multinodular tumor. It is true statement, but they are not mentioned. TACE is used for this case. They have not mentioned. You have mentioned TACE is done. If they have mentioned, I would have gone for false. But they are very clearly mentioned TACE is done for multinodular tumor. That is an interesting point. So transarterial chemoembolization. This is the hepatic artery. So the interesting point in liver is, if this is a tumor, the liver receives 80% of the blood from portal vein only. Please remember, 80% of the blood to the liver is from portal vein. But if there is a tumor, 100% of blood flow to the tumor is from hepatic artery only, not from portal vein at all. This is the concept behind this therapy, transarterial embolization therapy. This is the concept of transarterial embolization. The concept says, for example, if there are some right side tumors like this, small multiple right side tumors. If I embolize this right side hepatic artery, what will happen? This right lobe will go for ischemic necrosis. Will go for ischemic necrosis and the tumors will shrink. This is the concept. If I do right side hepatic artery embolization, the tumor will shrink and go for disappearance. This is embolization. This is done with the help of special substances like a lipoidal, or many particles are there. Now, recently with the lipoidal, they started attaching chemotherapy agents also. If you use chemotherapy, that is known as transarterial chemoembolization. I can use iodine 131 or yttrium also. That is known as transarterial radioembolization. So these are all various methods of embolization. Previously done was normal embolization, transarterial embolization. Nowadays, we are doing transarterial chemo or radio embolizations are also done. But whatever it is, the main indication of transarterial embolization is for multinodular tumors. Another important prerequisite is what? Yes, NEET SS aspirant, what is the prerequisite for transarterial embolization? Any NEET SS aspirant here attending the class? So what is the indication for prerequisite for transarterial chemoembolization? Can you tell me? Yes, that can be a future MCQ for you or for you guys. Yes, nobody is answering. Transarterial chemoembolization, the important prerequisite is, prerequisite is liver should be normal. There should be no liver failure. Yes, future liver Remnant is one another important, but if there is a liver failure, we cannot do this. Liver should be normal. Then only I can do this transarterial embolization. So if liver is already having a failure, this will cause definite death of the patient. So it is contraindicated in liver failure patients. Very interesting point. So transarterial chemoembolization is an excellent topic from Sabiston. I have pointed out the points here. So transarterial embolization causes ischemic necrosis of the tumor with a response of 50% rate. Yttrium 90 can also be delivered to HCC by this method known as transarterial radioembolization. So all these are recent methods. And how is it done? How is it done is an interesting point, because when I was doing MS general surgery, I have seen a case of transarterial chemoembolization. What they do is they do a huge incision they will make. They will dissect the hepatic artery, laparotomy they dissect the hepatic artery, they cannulate the hepatic artery with a cannula, and through that they will put the chemotherapy. Now it is not needed, no need of laparotomy now. Now the radiologists have excellent interventional facilities. So they will enter through the femoral artery, they go and cannulate the hepatic artery, and they will do by percutaneous technique itself is done by percutaneous fashion now, no laparotomy needed like before. So this is very interesting new point. Please don't forget, percutaneously we can do the case. Yes, very good, Yash. So these are the new drugs available from NCCN guidelines. All of you know sorafenib. It is a serine 309 kinase, VEGF, PDGF, multi-kinase, tyrosine kinase, all are inhibited with only 3 months increased survival. By giving a sorafenib, the patient is going to live for extra 3 months. That's not beyond that. Nivolumab is a programmed death 1 antibody. Ipilimumab is a CTLA4 antibody, cytotoxic leukocyte antibody. Lenvatinib, multi-kinase like sorafenib. It is like sorafenib, VEGF, fibroblast, PDGF alpha, KIT, RET, multi-kinase inhibitor. It is a multi-kinase inhibitor like sorafenib. All these drugs are only for advanced and inoperable HCCs, not for early cases as mentioned anywhere in the material. It is not for early cases, only for advanced and inoperable cases. So these are the new drugs. Nivolumab is mentioned in Sabiston. So I request you guys to remember nivolumab. Other 2 drugs are taken from NCCN guidelines. Anti-programmed death 1 antibody is nivolumab. Ipilimumab is CTLA4 antibody. Lenvatinib is multi-kinase inhibitor. Please don't forget any of these points. I yield MCQs for your exams. Okay. So any doubt with related to HCC you have? Any doubt you have with related to HCC? So HCC, the latest tumor marker is what? New tumor marker. New tumor marker for HCC is? Yes. PUCA. I think most of you are busy with writing notes. Protein-induced vitamin K absence. Protein-induced vitamin K absence is the new tumor marker used for HCC. And based on what staging we are managing the HCC nowadays? What is the staging we are managing the HCC nowadays? Yes? Under what staging we are managing HCC? Can you tell me? Barcelona clinic staging, BCLC. Barcelona clinic cancer staging we are using for liver cancer nowadays. As per this staging, what is Milan's criteria? And what is the management known as Milan's criteria? As per Barcelona clinic staging, what is Milan's criteria management? Yes, it's a neat PG question only. Milan's criteria says, HCC, we can do liver transplant. You can wonder, why, how can we do a transplant for a cancer case? Yes, we can do a transplant for cancer cases when the size of the tumor is single tumor less than 5 centimeter or 1 to 3 tumors all less than 3 centimeter with no extra hepatic mets. This is known as Milan criteria. Please don't forget this criteria. What is Milan criteria means? Milan criteria says if there is a single tumor less than 5 centimeter or 1 to 3 tumors all less than 3 centimeters and no extra hepatic mets, I can do as per Milan criteria. This is known as Milan's criteria in Barcelona clinic cancer staging. For tumors 1 to 3 centimeter size, they advise transplant also. Okay, this is a very interesting point. So HCC is again a high yield MCQ topic for your exam. So you can get MCQs from that very frequently. So now again they come to urology. The examiners have now become so much attracted to urology chapter from Bailey and Lau, so they started asking so many questions. Which of the following is not a LUTS, lower urinary tract symptom? So lower urinary tract symptom is most commonly caused by what? Caused in males by bladder outlet obstruction. This is from Bailey and Lau. This is clear-cut question from Bailey and Lau. You can easily answer the question without reading this. I'll tell you the concepts from Bailey and Lau. Hesitancy, voiding. There is a patient wants to pass urine. He is unable to pass the urine. Hesitancy, poor flow, intermittent. It comes like a shower, intermittently coming like a shower. Dribbling, sensation of incomplete emptying, episodes of retention of urine. Storage related because of the detrusor muscle hyperactivity. Because of this BPH, the detrusor has become so much irritant and it will be continuously contracting and cause frequency, nocturia, urgency, urge incontinence, nocturnal incontinence. Actually, they may also have stress incontinence also. Stress incontinence is also a type of LUTS symptom, but though it is not there in this column. So urge incontinence means the patient wants to pass urine, but it will come out. Before he goes to the restroom, it will come out. Nocturnal, they go in the night in the bed itself. So nocturnal enuresis. All these are LUTS symptoms. You can easily answer in this question. The examiner is so genuine. He has put a simple question of incontinency while intercourse. There will be no such concept at all. Incontinency during intercourse never happens. Especially this is not at all there. Urge to incontinent, hesitancy, sleep incontinence, stress incontinence, all will be there. Lower urinary tract symptom. So can you tell me what is the investigation of choice to diagnose bladder outflow obstruction? So this LUTS symptom patients, the moment you see such case, immediately you send them for this investigation. What is it? Excellent, Bhargav Patel. That is correct. It is uroflowmetry. It is a special method of measuring the flow rate. You have to measure the flow rate and voiding pressure. What is significant? Can you tell me what is normal? Voiding pressure of less than 60 centimeter water is normal. I'm telling you normal value. Flow rate of more than 200 ml is normal. So this is a direct table from Bailey and Lau. So voiding volume of more than 200 ml is normal. At the time of 200 ml, he should flow at a rate of 15 ml per second. He should flow more than 15 ml per second. And similarly, voiding pressure should be 60 centimeter water. So BOO is defined by bladder outlet obstruction defined by less than 10 ml per second flowing, and the pressure goes more than 80 centimeter water, not millimeters mercury. Okay, it is water. So this is a highly expected value for your exams. It's very good, Bhargav Patel. Whatever telling is from Campbell, I think you are reading from Campbell, but Bailey says simple answer of more than 15 ml and pressure of less than 60 is normal. So this is normal values. Okay, don't forget the normal values. So this is to be done for patients coming to you with the lower urinary tract symptoms. This is a baby MCQ from pediatric surgery. Actually, this is a question from pediatric surgery. I'm telling you, they have asked question from all the system. From pediatric surgery, they have put one question. Most common cause of urinary obstruction in male neonate is posterior urethral wall. So investigation of choice for posterior urethral wall. What is the answer? I'll give you the choice. A, urethroscopy. B, MCU. C, CT scan, which is correct. Yes, I will give you another choice. Retrograde ureterogram also, which is correct answer here. So please remember, micturating cystogram, also known as voiding cystogram, is the correct answer. This is the correct answer. Urethroscopy is not diagnostic. What actually happens in posterior urethral wall? Please understand the posterior urethral wall. This is prostatic urethra. This is membranous urethra. And this is a predominant part known as verumentanum. This is a predominant part known as verumentanum. This is bladder. So this is the urethra going like this. Actually, the valve is a very thin membranous valve, not a thick valve at all. It is a thin membranous valve like this. It will be like this. See, understand, it will be like this. So when a patient tries to pass urine, it will go and approximate and it will close that. It will be seen distal to verumentanum. This is the one MCQ. So posterior urethral valve is seen distal to verumentanum. Therefore, when the boy tries to pass urine, he cannot pass urine. But at the same time, when you put a Foley's catheter or a scope inside like this, that valve will open up easily. Therefore, you cannot diagnose, you cannot even see the valve with the scopy. That is the point here given in Bayesian law. Posterior urethral valve is the most common anomaly causing outlet obstruction, 1 in 5,000. Valves are membranous. Valve lies distal to verumentanum. They are flap valves. They obstruct antegrade flow, whereas retrograde catheter can pass. That is why I'm telling you, retrograde ureterogram may be normal. Cystoscopy can be normal. Okay, cystoscopy can be normal. Ureteroscopy can be normal. This diagnosis can be made in antenatally by showing of bilateral hydronephrosis. If missed in the antenatal period, the baby presents with urinary infection, uremia, and failure. Please don't forget this point. And very interesting is ureteroscopy is not useful as valve opens back as we flow the irrigant inside. As you push the fluid from here, the valve will open. Therefore, you cannot diagnose it by that method. This is an investigation showing you. Image-based question for FMG exam. Micturating cystourethropography showing you the valve. Can you see? This is the valve. Posterior urethral valve. That's a posterior urethral valve. In whichever scopy, if you put, there will be, when you push, that will go back. So most of the time, ureteroscopy is actually used. In the management, they use ureteroscopy. But diagnosis already made with the help of micturating cystogram, and then they go with the ureteroscopy. They will cut and remove the valve. That's a treatment. They will cut and remove the valve with the help of ureteroscopy only finally. But ureteroscopy is not useful as valve opens back as we flow irrigant inside. This is a line from Bayesian law. So please remember, this is only discussing flexible. They won't use rigid at this point of time. So flexible is no use. Initial management is we have to put a Foley's catheter. That's an interesting point. You have to put a Foley's catheter, recover as renal function, then you go for surgery. Okay. So very simple, straightforward pediatric surgery question. So now there is a question again, another question from gallbladder. Actually, from gallbladder, they asked two questions. A patient presented to the emergency department with abdominal pain, fever, and jaundice associated with chills and rigors. Cholangitis was suspected. Okay, this is a case of cholangitis. What do you mean by Reynolds Pented? So very simple. I hope you know Reynolds Pented 1, 2, 3 or Charcot-Striate. Pain, fever, jaundice. This is known as Charcot-Striate. If there is Charcot-Striate, there is 10% mortality. Please remember, there is 10% mortality if there is Charcot-Striate. Pain, fever, jaundice with septic shock causing hypotension. Septic shock causing hypotension and mental alteration. Patient will be confused. This is known as Reynolds Pented. So that's known as Reynolds Pented. Please don't forget this. So the answer here is jaundice, melena is not there, hypotension, mental alteration, hematemesis is not there, fever. So there is 1, 3, 4, 6. Answer is B. That's the correct answer here. Please don't forget. What will I do for this case now immediately? So now the protocol in the management of cholangitis. So this is a very straightforward line from Sabiston. What is this protocol? Now cholangitis patient coming to you with a septic shock. How I am going to manage? Let me tell you the protocol. Number 1, start IV fluids. Start higher antibiotics, not simple injection. Meropenem, like that we have to start. Start meropenem or higher antibiotics. Higher antibiotics, not simple antibiotics like zone and metrogel and all, is not useful. Then immediately we have to know where is the obstruction. We have to know if there is an ultrasound available. With ultrasound, you will come to a diagnosis. Okay, there is a CBD stone or whatever it is. Ultrasound, if it is inconclusive, go for MRCP and confirm the obstruction. And immediate gold standard is what? What is a gold standard management? This is a typical question for an AIIMS exams. So what is a gold standard? Very good, Bhargav Patel. We have to do ERCP, sphincterotomy and stenting and drain the bile. Actually, it is not a bile. It will be a pus inside the biliary system. Drain it. Afterwards, we will deal whatever it is. So gold standard management is ERCP, sphincterotomy and stenting. If it fails, what will I do now? If it is impossible or fails, what will I do next? I will go for a PTBD. Okay, PTBD. That is what I discussed already. ERCP fails, go for PTBD. If PTBD facility is also not there, I will go for a surgical treatment. That is the last option. Please remember, with Reynolds Pented, there is 50% mortality. If a patient comes to you with a Raynaud's pentet, 50% of the time they will die. 50% of the time they will die. Please remember this point. 50% mortality is seen with the Raynaud's pentet. Okay. Simple question. Next question is a very simple question. Which of the following is, any doubt you have with related to ERCP, PTC or other things, you please tell me. Which of the following is true about colon cancer? It's a very simple question directly taken from Bailey and Love, except one point, that is metformin decreases colon cancer is a very important point. Metformin decreases breast cancer, decreases prostate cancer, decreases pancreas cancer, decreases colon cancer in type 2 diabetes patients. In type 2 diabetes patients, whoever is taking all these drugs, it is very useful. Okay, now statins decreasing colon cancer I have not read. NSAIDs, aspirin and metformin are the three drugs mainly found to decrease colon cancer. NSAIDs, aspirin and metformin. So this is actually a pharmacology point. You should know that right and left colon will have different presentation. Undoubtedly, you know that very well. Right colon has a big diameter like this. Left colon have a narrow diameter like this. So right colon, the cancers are all proliferative growth like this. Left colon is a stricturous growth like this. So therefore, right side colon cancers presents with melena, mass, anemia. This is the presentation of right colon cancers. Left colon cancers presents with altered bowel habits like loose stools, constipation, and more importantly, they present in emergency as obstruction of left colon. That is the point I want you to remember. They will present as emergency as obstruction. So these are more important points I want you to remember. So melena, mass is presentation of right colon. Emergency left colon presents with intestinal obstruction. This is an FMG question. Please don't forget this FMG point. Okay. Colon cancer can be hereditary. Yes, it can be hereditary. It can come and run in families. Those who are having HNPCC, those who are having familial adenomatous polyposis, these guys will develop hereditary colon cancer. Colon cancer frequently metastasis to liver. Yes, the most common site of distant mets is to liver. So all are correct in this. All points are correct in this. So no doubt in this. It's a clear-cut question, simple question. So colon cancer is associated with the consumption of red meat, fat, smoking, alcohol have increased risk of colon cancer. An interesting line from Bailey and Love. Cholecystectomy may marginally increase the risk of right side colon cancer. Please don't forget. Inflammatory bowel disease is a risk factor. Everyone knows that. So cholecystectomy may marginally increase the risk of colon cancer. So this is from internet journals. NSAID, aspirin, metformin are the drugs to have protective effect. So metformin can protect multiple other cancers also. Okay. High salted diet is for esophageal, not for esophageal cancers. Predominantly it is for gastric cancers. High salt, high spicy foods and all for gastric cancers. Okay. So this is a pure pathology question, but we have been discussing this in surgery for more than 2-3 years. Same question has been asked in INI said already. In a case of cancer breast with HER2 new immunohistochemistry, HER2 positive, which of the following needs FISH study? So please remember, we have to do estrogen receptor, progesterone receptor, and HER2 in all cancer patients after MRM. After doing modified radical mastectomy, send the tissue for immunohistochemistry for ER, PR, HER2. So ER will be given the result as positive or negative. PR will be given the result positive or negative. HER2 will be given a result as 0, +1, +2, +3. This is the result you get for HER2. So what is positive, which is negative? 0 and +1 are said to be negative for HER2. +3 is said to be positive for HER2. Therefore, 2 + 2 is doubtful. So I will say it is equivocal. So these cases are confirmed by fluorescent in situ hybridization. So FISH is indicated for +2 cases. +2 cases. With the help of this immunohistochemistry, we have a classification known as molecular classification of cancer breast. We have a classification known as molecular classification of cancer breast, in which we have luminal A type, luminal B type, basal type, and HER2 type are the four types we commonly have. So can you tell me which is most common of these four types? So luminal A is most common, ER positive, progesterone receptor positive, HER2 negative. This is the most common type. How to remember luminal B? So I will tell you B means you should be always B positive, all are positive. Basal means you are in the base if you are all negative. Don't get confused in this in the exam. So base, you will go to the base when you become negative. So all negative will go to the base. If you are B group, you should be always B positive. So please remember B positive, all positive. Basal, all negative. HER2, only HER2 is positive. All other guys are negative. HER2 is positive, all other guys are negative. So this is a classification. Please don't forget. Luminal A is the most common type. BRCA2 is associated with luminal A type. BRCA1 is associated with basal type. So these are all simple questions you'll be seeing in your exam, and the best prognosis is with luminal A type as the best prognosis. So basal and HER2 have bad prognosis. They both have bad prognosis. Basal will have worst prognosis. So these are all questions you'll be reading in pathology, though it is not a straightforward surgery question. Since it is coming from Cancer Plus, just I wanted to put one point here, because this is already discussed in surgery 6R. We have already made discussion on this topic. So recently, FISH2 is used to detect HER2 amplification and advised for IHC HER2 positive cases of +2 onwards. Okay, +2 cases onwards, we will do that. So this is actually again a NEET SS question. This is again a NEET SS question being asked in INI set. Inferior thyroid artery supplies to. Yes, basal type is more common with the BRCA1. So in BRCA1, the most common type among this type is basal type. Okay, in BRCA1, the most common among the four types is basal type. That will have a very bad prognosis. So inferior thyroid artery supplies esophagus, thyroid, parathyroid, not thymus. So answer is 1, 2, 3. It's a simple question. But I want to discuss this because I want to discuss about the esophageal blood supply. I want to discuss about the esophageal blood supply. I will divide the esophagus into cervical esophagus, thoracic esophagus, abdominal esophagus. Abdominal is around 5 centimeter, thoracic is around 20 centimeter, cervical is around 5 centimeter. So 15 to 20 thoracic. In cervical esophagus, predominantly receives from inferior thyroid artery. That's the interesting point. Predominant blood supply for cervical esophagus is inferior thyroid artery. Inferior thyroid artery descending branch also supplies thoracic esophagus. So that's MCQ. So I want you to remember what are the blood supply of thoracic esophagus. Enormous blood vessels supply thoracic esophagus from Sabiston. Thoracic esophagus receives from aorta, both right and left bronchial artery, inferior thyroid artery, intercostal artery, and inferior phrenic artery. All this will supply the thoracic esophagus. Aorta, bronchial artery, inferior thyroid artery, intercostal artery, and inferior phrenic artery. These are the various blood vessels supplying the thoracic esophagus. So this question can be asked in NEET SS. So what are the branches supplying thoracic esophagus? Abdominal esophagus is supplied by left gastric artery and inferior phrenic artery, only 2 vessels. So please remember the abdominal esophagus blood vessel, thoracic esophagus blood vessel, and cricopharyngeal muscle is supplied by superior thyroid artery. Cricopharynx is supplied by superior thyroid artery. So superior thyroid artery has some relation to the esophageal inlet. So that is supplied by superior thyroid artery. So this paragraph is very important from Sabiston for NEET SS aspirants. I request you please remember this. All these vessels will form a capillary network. Like this. They enter the muscle and they form again a capillary network in the submucosal layer. After supplying the muscles, capillary network continues in the submucosal layer. Please remember this. So the capillary network is seen in submucosal layer. So this is a applied anatomy question from esophagus. This is a baby question. Sometimes the INI said people, they like to give eligibility mark for the people and they ask some questions like this. 30-year-old patient hit by bull and later presented with complaint of abdominal pain for 3 days and obstipation for 2 days along with nausea and vomiting. He was initially stabilized but now presented with increased pain. On examination, abdomen was found rigid. Radiograph was taken. What is it? This is a clear-cut picture showing you air under diaphragm. This is a picture of air under diaphragm. So it is a picture showing you hollow viscous perforation. It is being repeated multiple times. There is no discussion needed for air under diaphragm. But I'll tell you, air under diaphragm is seen in 70% cases only. Therefore, what is the gold standard? In X-ray, only 70% you can diagnose the air under diaphragm. So what is the gold standard to diagnose the air under diaphragm? Answer is CT scan. Very good. CT scan is 100% sensitive. So if you have a doubt related to perforation, you must go for a CT scan. So please ask me then and there any doubt you have, because the major part of this session is to clear your doubts only. The last question, a patient who had tibial fracture 1 month ago now had his cast removed. He had a cast. Best X-ray for perforation. Please remember this again, a repeat MCQ. So the best X-ray for perforation is X-ray abdomen erect, including diaphragm. That is the correct answer. Not chest X-ray. Chest X-ray may show the diaphragm, but in X-ray abdomen erect, we can have multiple other signs like Rigler sign, football sign, cupola sign, apart from air under diaphragm. So this part is very important. Please remember, in an X-ray abdomen, we have multiple findings. Rigler sign is a sign of air on either side of the bowel. Football sign is huge air under diaphragm. Cupola sign is air on either side of the zyphisternum like this, like a mushtaq. So these are all other signs you'll be discussing in radiology. But please remember, X-ray abdomen erect, including the diaphragm, is the best amount answer. And how much ml of air can be detected is 1 ml air can be detected. Just 1 ml air can be detected in an air under diaphragm. 1 ml is enough to be detected. These are all there in Sabiston. You can see this in Sabiston. These points are not there in Bailey. They're all in Sabiston. Very good. That is 5 ml in left lateral is also correct answer. 1 ml in erect view and 5 to 10 ml in lateral view. So this case is going to discuss about compartment syndrome. A patient comes to you with ecchymosis on the skin. A few days later, he comes with a pain on lifting his great toe and decreased sensation in the first web space. Both posterior tibial and dorsalis pedis are felt. What will be the next step? So this is a case of compartment syndrome. I'm telling you, there is a early sign seen. What is it? Paresthesia and pain on passive stretching. Pain on passive stretching of the fingers and paresthesia are early signs. The patient is in a early sign now. So therefore, the pulses will be normal. So I have to now measure the compartment pressure. This is an anterior compartment compression because there are 3 compartments we have. Actually, we have anterior 4 compartments: anterior, lateral, deep posterior, superficial posterior. So in a leg, we have 4 compartments, and this is an image-based question you can get in FMG exams. Please don't forget this. So this is a compartment pressure measuring catheter. It is a Stryker compartment pressure measuring instrument used to measure the compartment. It will show you the compartment pressures. If it is more than 30 millimeters mercury for prolonged period of time, I should go for a fasciotomy. If it is prolonged pressure for more than 30 millimeters mercury for long period of time, I should go for a fasciotomy. So please don't forget this point. Very important thing. And absence of distal pulses is a late sign. And there is an interesting line from Bailey and Love. Presence of pulses does not exclude compartment syndrome, and compartment pressure must be measured in all leg compartments by special device as shown in the image. Because if there is only an anterior compartment syndrome, the posterior tibial artery will be normal. Therefore, we have to measure each compartment separately like this, and we have to come to a conclusion. And if there is a high pressure, we have to do fasciotomy of that compartment immediately by longitudinal incision. Okay, that's a compartment pressure syndrome. So thank you so much.